Welcome to the show. It's Monday. Chris Graham, Rod Mullins. We're going to talk NASCAR, and there's a lot to get into. We'll start with the race on Saturday night down in Daytona with, boy, a lot of super speedway racing. We had a couple of the big ones. We had overtime. We had a bunch of names at the top of the leaderboard there in the overtime three laps that any one of which could have made things interesting in the playoff race. And it turned out it came down to Kyle Busch and Harrison Burton. What a story with Harrison Burton getting the lead on the last lap, holding off Kyle Busch to get the win.
Yeah.
Um, you know, Rod, it's a guy that was told earlier this year he doesn't have a ride next year. Now he's in the playoffs.
Yeah. That was the thing that I shook my head on Saturday night, and I kept on saying, they've announced that this guy is without a home for next year. He's not coming back to the Wood Brothers. The Wood Brothers have already announced that Josh Berry, who had a great race too, until he flipped and then did the spin around there toward the infield. But Harrison Burton ran a race, and I kept on hearing Harrison Burton's name throughout the race as running close to the front. And I thought, it's going to be a good, maybe a good finish for him altogether. But that late wreck that they had, the caution right there, I'm telling you, it was just amazing to see, to witness. I had a chance to witness the Wood Brothers victory at Daytona when Trevor Bayne from Knoxville got the win for them. And, that was great in and of itself, but this was even more special because it was the Wood Brothers' 100th win as a race team. And it's taken them a while to get there, but Harrison Burton got there, and Jeff Burton, his dad, who was up in the press box for NBC that night, um, he was ecstatic over the whole thing. He's quoted as saying, he's been a hard ass on Harrison most of the time and everything. And Harrison gives credit where credit's due. He said, I wouldn't be here without my dad and the rest of the Burton brothers and everybody else all together with this. So it was a great night for racing, nonetheless.
So Burton was on the restart. There was a battle for the lead. Bush
Hmm.
seemed like he had things in control the first lap and a half, 2 laps of that 3 lap
Hmm.
overtime. And Burton had, but he had the line. He had a push from behind Parker Retzlaff,
Yep.
guy that few folks have probably heard of or thought much of on the NASCAR series this year. But he was, they were in line. He got a nice push there. Burton got the lead, and then he had to play some defense there
Hmm.
because Bush was trying every way he could to get around him, try to go above, try to go below.
Hmm.
Eventually, hit Burton, no, slightly, just bumped him a little
Yeah.
bit in the rear and knocked Burton down below the double yellow line. They had to review that at the end to make sure that
Right.
he wasn't trying to gain advantage. But
Hmm.
I mean, that was a great exercise in defensive driving by Burton to hold on to that lead once he got it.
Yeah, it was. It was a great defense. I mean, once he had the push, and he had that push from Parker Retzlaff, who, by the way, has come under fire because here he is, a Chevrolet pushing a Ford in this case and trying to push Harrison Burton to the front. And there was a lot of radio talks, some things that had been kind of generated around, and some of it is clickbait, I'm sure, but there's some rumors out there about the fact that Retzlaff was told not to push a Ford. Don't push anybody else except for Kyle Busch in this situation. Well, he had no possibility of being able to push Kyle Busch. And of all things, a Toyota was pushing Kyle Busch, and that was Christopher Bell. And Christopher Bell and him have, they've kind of had some differences at times, but Christopher Bell was pushing him to the front with the possibility of, hey, if I can get Kyle Busch out here to the front, maybe it can be a race between the two of us before it's all said and done. But, still, Harrison Burton, it was just a great defensive effort on his part to kind of block and to keep Kyle Busch from getting that inside line. And you know what? Kyle Busch essentially saw his playoff window explode, kind of, just go out with this race because there were a lot of people saying this could be the race. He's ran up front almost all night. He has stayed clean. He was very close to being involved in the big one early on. He managed to make it out, and then there toward the very end, there were a lot of people, I'm sure, that were cheering, hoping that Kyle Busch was going to go across the start finish line with the victory. But Harrison Burton prevailed, and Kyle Busch is still wondering. I think he's over 100 and some points now out of the cut line from where he's supposed to be at. And he's got a hope for Darlington this coming weekend down there for the Cookout Southern 500. And Darlington has been good and bad for him at different times. So it remains to be seen what we will see this coming Sunday night down at Darlington.
We saw a couple of cars get a little airborne, a little bit of air underneath them. The one I remember, it was it Logano got a little airborne, and then
Yep.
the NBC team was talking about during the break while they were fixing the track up and everything else. Oh, look at how all the safety advances worked and kept him from going completely airborne. And then we had one a few laps later, where was it Barry that went on his
Josh
top?
Berry, yeah, that
Yeah,
was
he
the
went on
one I
his
was
top
referring
and
to.
skidded there for a while.
Yeah.
And one of the big questions coming out just from a technological standpoint after the race is, NASCAR has done a lot to try to keep these cars from doing that. What do we do to keep these guys safe and not flipping like that on the track?
Good question. I mean, they thought that putting this right window in with the little bit of a fin to it that would deflect the air off of it, they were all bragging because Michael McDowell was the one that they thought was going to lift up, and the way he was coming up, for a moment it looked like he was going to go into the catch fence, but then he came back down. But I think the probably the nerving part is when you're Joey Logano and you're seeing the in camera like everybody else is, and you see that car just suddenly go airborne over top of you like that. You're wondering what the final result is going to be. And Michael McDowell made it through fine. He didn't have any problems. Josh Berry was the one I was really scared about because once he took off, he lifted up and then he hit head on with this car into the safer barrier down there. It took a whale of a hit. And then the car just kept on spinning like a top, spinning around there before it finally came to rest there in a newly configured part of the infield that they have fixed up. Matter of fact, that was done. I heard about this, Chris. This was done. That used to be grass, and now they have removed it, put some pavement or something in there, a little bit of some obstructions to be able to slow the cars down a little bit. It didn't slow it down, but Jeff Burton made a great point. If that had been the old race car, that whole cockpit area of the car probably would have been crushed in because of the hit that he took. He landed back down on top of it. He says that this next generation car did its job in that regard. Now the big question is we find out what's making these things go airborne. And, two tracks, 2 weekends, that's something to kind of raise some eyebrows about.
I was reading something over the weekend in the Athletic about super speedway racing and how it's changed with the next gen car.
Mhm.
And wanted to get your thoughts on this. I mean, I saw this a good bit, discussed on the NBC broadcast about how fuel strategy is as important as anything else, it seems, because the next gen car, everybody's so close to each other in terms of the power and the quality of the car, that it's not like, okay, just put the foot to the floor and see how fast we can go for the whole race. It's almost like we want to make sure that we pay attention to the fuel strategy and
Right.
have to take on as little gas as possible, especially that final pit stop. And there was a lot of that going on there. If there had been another overtime, I don't know how things might have been different as far as the finish goes.
Yeah.
It just seems like things are different now. And I noticed a couple times when I would look at the numbers, NBC gives a lot of numbers like everybody else does. Some laps you'd see the leader at 201 miles an hour. Some laps you'd see the leader going around 189, 190, 191
Yep.
miles an hour because they're valuing that fuel more than they are valuing the speed.
Hey, I don't know if you saw it or not too. The tempo or the telemetry that was coming off some of the cars, you had people like it was running maybe 189 miles an hour, 190, 192 miles an hour out front. Then you had cars in the back going up through there. As long as they got hooked up in the chain and they were able to go up through there in the train going through, uh, I think Ricky Stenhouse at one point didn't even have his a foot down on the accelerator on the gas, and he was still pulling something like 194, 195 miles an hour. That's just unreal. But he wasn't using his foot. The old way that you and I have been taught, and the way that we always thought about it, put the hammer down, put your foot down, let it go as it needs to be. This bunched up racing kind of reminds me, I think, the first time that they played around with this restrictor plate sort of thing at Talladega here years ago, and it kind of leveled out the field. But then the drivers and the car owners and the teams got together and said, we can do some things with this. Let's just play around with it. Now they don't have a chance to be able to play around with it, as witnessed by Denny Hamlin's penalty that he got before the race this coming weekend of tearing down an engine, Joe Gibbs Racing tearing down an engine and so forth before it was supposed to. And that got them in some major league trouble. He took a hit in the standings also out of this. So that removes any kind of, tinkering, so to speak, of that weekend grease monkey or these guys down in the pits that like to do this sort of thing and trying to just eke out a little bit more power. It's not there anymore. This is standard. This is the way the cars come. And yeah, it surprised me that Stenhouse didn't even have his foot but halfway on the gas, and he was still being pulled around the track by everybody hooked up together. And it's just the way that you are on the interstate. If you're going down the interstate, you're behind one of these semis and everything. I love to do that. My wife tells me, she says, you're anchoring for trouble with this. But I like to get up not so close, but I like to get up close enough to a semi and let that semi pull me down through there, because it's calm as it can be once you're inside that truck right there, and you don't use as much gas. I mean, you still have to keep the pedal down to maintain the speed up through there and stuff, but man, no resistance, least amount of gas that you're burning in that kind of situation. It works for you in one way or another. It's just not working right now. And I think NASCAR is going to have to take a serious look at this. They've got Talladega coming up in October. So something's going to have to be done, especially before they get to Talladega. And this is what scares me too. The airborne thing, the speed and so forth. You can pretty much command some speeds of high velocity going around at Darlington. If you go and you end up into the wall from the lady in black and she gives you a kiss and you're into the wall, Lord knows how fast these cars could be going Sunday night. One of them could jump the fence. Who knows how it's going to work? So NASCAR's got a lot of things they've got to look at here in the next couple of weeks.
Getting back to Harrison Burton with his win, he was 34th in the standings when he got the win. So he was way out of the playoff
Yep.
picture. He raced his way into the playoffs now. So that's the 13th automatic qualifier. That
Mhm.
means we've got 3 playoff spots with the regular season finale at Darlington this Sunday. And we've got 5 guys now outside of whoever might win, pull another Harrison Burton and sneak out from beyond this. But 5
Right.
guys who are in the points race right now. Just if no one wins among anybody who's not won this season, Martin Truex Jr., Ty Gibbs, and Chris Buescher on the correct side of the line, and
Right.
then Bubba Wallace, Ross Chastain on the outside right now looking in. Of course, Burton's win made things much more interesting for those guys. And again, a wild card coming out from below. I mean, a Kyle Busch who,
Mhm.
he was so close on Saturday night. So obviously he's got a little bit of a hot streak going. If you want to say just one race is,
Yep.
as far as that goes, there could be somebody else sneak up there. Obviously a lot on the line, and there's some names there. Truex, Gibbs, Buescher, Wallace, Chastain. Those are all names in NASCAR, and at least a couple, maybe 3, will be left out when we get done on Sunday.
Well, and it's all the scramble too. I mean, we've had headlines this past week of Trackhouse Racing releasing Zane Smith, and they're going with Shane Van Gisbergen next season for the 2025 season. Shane Van Gisbergen was running pretty good at the Daytona race until he got caught up in an accident and got taken out. But yeah, you're right. Here are teams like Ross Chastain with Trackhouse Racing that is on the bubble. They're right there and they're close to being knocked out of it. Bubba Wallace is, in one sense, close enough, but a big mess up on Sunday night could very well, do his chances in of, finishing and going into the playoffs. Chris Buescher, I think that he had probably the most interesting line of anybody after the race that night. He says, hey, we were running toward the front. We come in 10th. 10th is good enough. Not in this case, because we needed points. We needed to be up there closer to where we needed to be at in order to get into this thing. We'd like to have won, but it didn't happen. But Brad Keselowski, he's already in. But look at what happened to Brad Keselowski right there at the end, toward the end of the race. They black flagged him. He had to go and serve a penalty, go through a pass through down through pit road. But you also saw Ty Gibbs making a run in this. We mentioned Christopher Bell. Hey, what about Cody Ware? That was one that just came out of nowhere. Wasn't even expecting Cody Ware to be running as well as he did. He started out 33rd when the race started, and he ended up finishing fourth in a Rick Ware Ford. So, yeah, we could have just about anybody into this. They were even talking Saturday night of the possibility that what happens if Austin Dillon wins this race? Austin Dillon wins this race, what's going to happen with it? Or, are you going to give him points back? And it's like, well, he's going to earn his points and he'll earn them this way, a certain way out of it. But, there were people talking that it's like, hey, the unexpected could happen tonight. And sure enough, it did with Harrison Burton. And so, it's hard telling what we're going to see on Sunday at Darlington. That's for sure.
Yeah, just watching the race on Saturday night, Dylan was up in the top 10, top 5 some
Yeah.
during the race on Saturday night.
Yeah.
So he could have made all that talk about the penalty from Richmond mute as far as that goes. Hey, let's switch to some off the track news, scheduling news. A couple of things to mention that we have had glossed over the last couple of weeks. For one, NASCAR's finalizing a deal to add Mexico City to the series in 2025 for a points race. It'll be the first points race outside the U.S. in 67 years. Huge news in NASCAR.
Yeah, huge news. And I think the last time that they had a points race was in Canada, I believe, at one time or another. But I think this has kind of been helped out a little bit more by Daniel Suarez and some of the success that he's had. Of course, he has signed a deal. He's back with Trackhouse for another year or two, I think, after this season. But yeah, they're going to race at Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez in Mexico City next year, is the way that they're talking about it. NASCAR is going to utilize the same circuit that Formula One uses when they have their Mexican Grand Prix. There'll be a slight modification that'll be analyzed regarding the main straight, and also throwing in an additional chicane through there as well. And expected to make the announcement will be Steve O'Donnell with NASCAR. Daniel Suarez, who has kind of become the Mexican ambassador, so to speak, for NASCAR. He won some races down in Brazil when they had the off weeks when the Olympics was going on. But the negotiations have confirmed that the Cup teams will be joined by the NASCAR Xfinity Series, along with a chance for the NASCAR Mexico division to also be in there as well as the support series. So these guys will have a chance. These guys, and like they do when they go to the road courses, they're going to throw a ringer in. Somebody's going to throw a ringer in that's a great road course driver and especially knows that course down there in Mexico. So they'll probably try to throw somebody in there if they're weak in one position out of it. Some other news coming out of it too. I think Richmond only got one date, or at least we've not heard the official announcement yet, but Richmond still is going to hold on to one date right now. I know Dale Earnhardt Jr. was, the story was he was fuming because they had ended up dropping one of the dates. It was probably the most enthusiastic win. And that was the Austin Dillon win. So by that, it indicates that they're probably going to run in the early part of the year, in the spring at least. But Bristol ended up was from March. Now they're moving to April, which is kind of a good thing. I'm kind of in favor of that a little bit more. I kind of wondered why NASCAR had gotten away from that. But now they're moving back. It's going to end up being on a Sunday. They will not be, I think they're a week before, I believe, Easter, I think is what it's going to be. And NASCAR is not going to run on Easter this time around. So there's going to be some changes. I think it's going to influence some people. And probably the big news out of that, Chris, is probably the rumor that I'm hearing right now. The talk is San Diego is interested in a Chicago style street race, much the same way. And if that happens, that'll be the only Southern California connection they'll have to NASCAR, because, effective now, the clash that they had at the season there at the Coliseum is over. It's gone. It's going to Bowman Gray Stadium in North Carolina. So, it's been the site of some great races over the last, 75 years or so forth. And they're going to be racing there to start everything out here on the East Coast. I think the big thing's going to be is whether or not they can get that support again, like they've had from that Southern California market, and they've not had it too much when it came to Auto Club Speedway because nobody really knows what's going to happen with Auto Club. They were tearing it down at one point, going to make it into a short track, and now they're at a standstill. So we don't know what they're going to have. If the only races come to California, it'll be San Diego probably by 2026 if they even do it that way. And then you'll have the race in wine country, which will be up in there at Sears Point.
From a marketing standpoint, yes, not being in the LA market particularly is a
Mm-hmm.
huge loss. That's the one of the top three markets in the US, certainly from size, and you got to be there. The NFL was out of the LA market for a number of years. Now they're back with two teams there. You got to be in the LA market, but then on the other side of that, the Clash race, putting in the Coliseum the way they had been, that track just, I mean, it was just not racing. It was
Right.
the track's too short. You couldn't do a lot. It was a spectacle more than it was a race. So,
Yeah.
um, from the racing standpoint, getting the racing season started off standpoint, I like moving back to North Carolina, but yeah, it's a glaring omission not to have anything in Southern California.
The Coliseum race was like going to Pigeon Forge and racing on one of those little narrow tracks that you have down there with one of those little cars that one way or another has been either goosed or has been reduced in power and so forth. And you're going down through there and you've got a 6-year-old kid that has no business being behind the wheel, just ramming everybody and knocking them all over the place. And then you've got 40 or 50-year-old people like me trying to get in there and they're trying to go and put the kid into the wall to, teach him a lesson out of it. And they're like, rough driving, stop, you got to stop. I mean, nobody did this during the Coliseum race, but that's kind of what it reminded me of. Just one of those races that you'd run into at Pigeon Forge or Gatlinburg.
Yeah, they couldn't really get they couldn't rev the engines up very much. They couldn't get a lot of speed. Again, it was a spectacle. I mean, and it was an
Mm-hmm.
important place to
Yep.
be, but you got to find a better place to do it than that. And but wine country is not Southern California.
Nope.
Even we were talking about Mexico City earlier. I mean, Mexico City is in a way different part of Mexico than even Baja California, which is just on the other side
Exactly.
of the border from San Diego. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean that's something NASCAR's got to address. I mean they've done a great job getting into Chicago the last couple of years, certainly expanding the market. I love the Iowa race this year.
Mm-hmm.
They're going into more places, but you got to be in LA down the road. So
Well, and who knows where this sport's going to go. I mean, there's still the continuing rumor that it's going to be a NASCAR Europe race. There's going to be one that goes to Europe before it's over with. If they take this first step into Mexico and things go well with that, it'll be one of those things of who can we attract or which one of these cities or, places in Europe is going to be able to go and attract a NASCAR race and bring them there and stuff. And then let's see if like the big comment that was going on this past weekend about Kyle Larson and Max Verstappen talking about, who's better in a race car. And Kevin Harvick said plainly on his podcast the other night, he said, I would put my money on Kyle Busch anytime or not Kyle Busch, but Kyle Larson every time he gets in a car. He says Max Verstappen is not going to be able to get in one of these stock cars and be able to race the same way that Kyle Larson does day in and day out and week in, week out with racing, dirt track racing, whatever it might be. It's almost like a gauntlet has been thrown down now at some of these European drivers to say, all right, let's see if you've got the kahunas to see if you're going to be able to step up against these guys. And let's see what kind of matchup we can get.
well, we have Darlington this weekend, regular season finale. We got 3 playoff spots on the line. We'll see if someone wins their way in. Yeah, otherwise, at least a couple of guys will be pointing their way in. It should be very interesting to watch indeed on this Labor Day weekend. Hey, Rod, as always, thank you for your time, your insight. Look forward to talking to you again next week.
Appreciate it, Chris. Thanks.